Sarah Mitchell had always prided herself on her attention to detail. After 5 years working as a secretary at Hartwell Textiles in Salem, Oregon, she knew every rhythm of the family-owned fabric company. The morning routines, the afternoon deliveries, the way Victoria Hartwell's heels clicked across the hardwood floors with purposeful authority. But on this particular September morning, something felt different. David had left for work earlier than usual, mentioning something about inventory checks. Sarah noticed the faint trace of cologne lingering in their small bathroom, a scent she didn't recognize. She shrugged it off initially, focusing instead on preparing for another day at the office where she'd worked alongside her husband for the past 3 years. The Hartwell Textiles building stood proudly on Commercial Street, its red brick facade reflecting the traditional values that Salem held dear. Victoria Hartwell, at 40, commanded respect throughout the community. She'd taken over the family business after her father's retirement, expanding their clientele beyond Oregon's borders while maintaining the company's reputation for quality and integrity. Her marriage to Robert Hartwell, a successful businessman who'd invested heavily in the company's growth, was considered one of Salem's power couples. Sarah arrived at the office to find Victoria already deep in conversation with David near the warehouse entrance. Their heads were bent close together, examining what appeared to be fabric samples. Victoria's laugh rang out, musical and warm, as David pointed to something on his clipboard. Sarah felt an unexpected prick of something. Unease? Jealousy? She couldn't quite name it. "Good morning, Sarah," Victoria called out, her smile bright and professional. David was just explaining the new silk shipment protocols. He's become quite the expert on quality control. David's cheeks flushed slightly at the praise. "Just doing my job, Mrs. Hartwell. Please, call me Victoria. We're all family here." Her hand briefly touched David's shoulder before she walked toward her office, leaving behind that same unfamiliar cologne scent Sarah had noticed at home. The rest of the morning passed in its usual rhythm, but Sarah found herself watching. She'd always been observant, a trait that served her well in organizing Victoria's complex schedule and managing the office's daily operations. Now, however, her attention was drawn to subtle interactions she'd previously overlooked. When Victoria needed files from the warehouse, she specifically requested David's assistance. When the afternoon mail arrived, she made a point of discussing delivery schedules with him personally. These weren't unusual requests in themselves, but their frequency seemed intentional. During lunch, Sarah sat in the small employee break room, picking at her sandwich while replaying the morning's interactions. Salem's tight-knit community thrived on trust and familiarity. People here knew each other's families, attended the same churches, and valued loyalty above all else. The idea that something inappropriate might be developing under her nose felt almost impossible to contemplate. Mary Chen, the accounts receivable clerk, joined her at the small table. "Victoria seems pleased with David's work lately," she observed, unwrapping her own lunch. "He's been staying late quite often, helping with the quarterly inventory." "Has he?" Sarah tried to keep her voice neutral. David had mentioned overtime work, but she'd assumed it was temporary, related to the busy fall season. "Oh yes, at least 3 nights this week. Victoria's been working late too, making sure everything's perfect for the upcoming Fabric Expo in Portland. They make a good team." The words settled uncomfortably in Sarah's chest. She finished her lunch quickly, suddenly eager to return to her desk, where she could focus on familiar tasks and push away the growing unease that threatened to consume her. Afternoon. That evening, David arrived home an hour later than usual, apologizing profusely about unexpected shipment delays. He showered immediately, using the same unfamiliar cologne Sarah had noticed that morning. When she asked about it, he mentioned that Victoria had recommended the brand, saying it projected a more professional image for client meetings. Sarah nodded, accepting the explanation while filing away another small piece of a puzzle she wasn't yet ready to assemble. Outside their modest home on Liberty Street, Salem settled into its familiar evening routine. unaware that one of its own was beginning to question everything she thought she knew about trust, loyalty, and the people closest to her heart. As autumn deepened around Salem, Sarah found herself cataloging inconsistencies with the precision she'd once reserved for Victoria's appointment schedule. David's work patterns had become increasingly erratic, his explanations more elaborate, and his attention to personal grooming unnaturally heightened. The local community's social calendar provided ample opportunities for observation. At the monthly Chamber of Commerce mixer, Sarah watched Victoria navigate the crowded room with her usual grace, pausing frequently to discuss business matters with various attendees. When she reached David, however, their conversation seemed different, more intimate. Victoria's laugh came easier, her touch on his arm lingered longer, and their eye contact held a quality that made Sarah's stomach tighten. "They certainly seem to be collaborating well," observed Janet Morrison, the banker's wife, following Sarah's gaze. "Victoria's lucky to have such dedicated employees." Sarah forced a smile. "David's always been conscientious about his work." "Of course, dear. Though I must say, he's looking quite distinguished lately. That new cologne suits him perfectly. Victoria has excellent taste in these matters." The casual comment hit Sarah like a physical blow. How did Janet Morrison know about David's cologne? How many people in Salem had noticed changes that Sarah was only beginning to acknowledge? The next morning brought new concerns. Victoria had assigned Sarah to handle client visits to 3 different suppliers across town, a task that would keep her away from the office for most of the day. As Sarah gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she noticed David's name wasn't on the daily assignment board. When she casually asked about his schedule, Victoria mentioned special projects requiring his attention in the warehouse. Driving through Salem's tree-lined streets, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her absence was being carefully orchestrated. The autumn leaves created a beautiful canopy overhead, but their falling seemed symbolic of something ending, something precious being lost without her realizing when the process had begun. Her first supplier meeting ran longer than expected, and by the time she returned to the office, the day shift was preparing to leave. David was nowhere to be seen, though his car remained in the parking lot. Victoria's office light was still on, and Sarah could hear muffled conversation through the closed door. She knocked gently, expecting to deliver the day's supplier reports. "Come in," Victoria called. Sarah entered to find Victoria and David seated close together at the small conference table, documents spread between them. They looked up with expressions that struck Sarah as slightly guilty, though Victoria quickly recovered her professional composure. "Sarah, perfect timing. David and I were just finalizing the new efficiency protocols. His insights have been invaluable." Victoria's hand rested casually on a document near David's elbow, close enough that their fingers nearly touched. "I can come back tomorrow if you're busy," Sarah offered, noting how David avoided her direct gaze. "Nonsense. We're finished here, aren't we, David?" Victoria's tone was warm, almost intimate. David gathered his papers quickly. "Yes, I should head home. Sarah, I'll meet you in the parking lot." As they left the office together, Sarah felt the weight of unspoken questions pressing against her chest. The evening air was crisp with the promise of an early winter, and Salem's streetlights were beginning to flicker on across the downtown area. "How was your day?" David asked as they walked to their respective cars. "Productive. How were the special projects?" "Fine, just fine." Victoria's very thorough in her approach to business. The hesitation in his voice, the careful choice of words, added another piece to Sarah's growing collection of concerns. As they drove home separately through Salem's quiet streets, she found herself wondering when her marriage had become something requiring such careful navigation, and whether the changes she was observing were as obvious to others as they were becoming to her. October arrived with the kind of brilliant foliage that made Salem a destination for leaf peepers from Portland and beyond. The downtown area bustled with tourists admiring the historic architecture and browsing the local shops. For Sarah, however, the beauty of the season was overshadowed by an increasing sense that her carefully ordered world was shifting beneath her feet. The company's annual Halloween party provided the setting for what would later feel like a turning point. Held at the historic Grand Hotel on State Street, the event brought together employees, clients, and prominent community members for an evening of networking disguised as celebration. Nahara wore a simple black dress, while David had chosen a surprisingly sophisticated costume that Victoria had helped him select during what he described as a brief shopping consultation. Sarah positioned herself near the refreshment table, watching the interactions across the elegantly decorated ballroom. Olem's social hierarchy was on full display, with the Hartwells naturally commanding attention at the center of various conversational clusters. Victoria looked stunning in a vintage 1940s ensemble that highlighted her natural elegance and business acumen. As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed a pattern in Victoria's movements. She would circulate through different groups, engaging in animated conversations with clients and community leaders. But her path repeatedly brought her back to wherever David happened to be standing. Their interactions appeared professional on the surface, but Sarah detected subtle undercurrents that made her increasingly uncomfortable. During the costume contest, Victoria and David found themselves standing together near the stage, laughing at the various entries. Sarah watched from across the room as Victoria leaned close to David's ear, apparently sharing some private observation about one of the contestants. David's response made Victoria throw her head back in delighted laughter, her hand instinctively reaching out to touch his arm in a gesture that seemed both natural and inappropriate. "They make quite a team, don't they?" The voice belonged to Margaret Foster, the owner of Salem's largest flower shop, and a woman known for her keen observation of social dynamics. Sarah turned, trying to keep her expression neutral. "They work well together, yes. Victoria's always been particular about the people she trusts, with important responsibilities. David must be quite talented to have earned such confidence so quickly." The implication in Margaret's tone was unmistakable. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized that others were not only noticing the same interactions that troubled her, but were also drawing conclusions that she wasn't yet ready to face. The evening's most unsettling moment came during the final dance. As couples took to the floor for the traditional last waltz, Sarah expected David to seek her out. Instead, she watched in growing dismay as Victoria approached him with a smile that was both professional and personal. "Would you mind?" Victoria asked, extending her hand. "Robert's tied up with the Portland clients, and I'd hate to miss the waltz entirely." David glanced toward Sarah, but she was blocked from his view by other dancers. "Of course, Mrs. Hartwell. It would be my pleasure." Sarah stood frozen near the edge of the dance floor, watching her husband guide her employer through the graceful steps of a dance that seemed far too intimate for a workplace relationship. Other couples swirled around them, but Sarah's attention was fixed on the way Victoria gazed up at David, the way their movements seemed perfectly synchronized, and the way David's hand rested on Victoria's back with a familiarity that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. When the music ended, Victoria and David remained standing close together for a moment longer than necessary, their conversation inaudible over the applause filling the ballroom. Sarah saw Victoria say something that made David smile with genuine warmth, and she knew with sudden, devastating clarity that what she was witnessing had moved far beyond professional collaboration. The drive home was tense with unspoken accusations and denials. David praised Victoria's organizational skills and discussed the evening's business networking opportunities, but his words felt hollow against the memory of that final dance. Salem's tree-lined residential street seemed to whisper with secrets as they pulled into their driveway, and Sarah found herself wondering how many other wives in their quiet community had stood where she was standing, recognizing the signs of something precious slipping away, while struggling to find the courage to confront a truth that would change everything. The Salem community's anticipation for the annual Thanksgiving festival provided a convenient excuse for what Sarah had begun to think of as special projects. David's involvement in the event planning committee meant additional evening meetings and weekend obligations that kept him away from home with increasing frequency. Victoria, as one of the festival's major sponsors, naturally took a hands-on approach to ensuring Hartwell Textiles' prominent participation. Sarah threw herself into her own volunteer work, helping to coordinate the food vendors and entertainment schedule. The activity provided welcome distraction from her growing concerns, but it also offered unexpected opportunities for observation. During a late afternoon planning session at the community center, she arrived early to find David and Victoria already present, seated at a corner table with their heads bent close together over what appeared to be budget spreadsheets. Their body language struck Sarah as remarkably intimate for a business discussion. Victoria's hand rested on the table mere inches from David's, and when she leaned forward to point out something on the documents, her shoulder brushed against his in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. David's response was a soft laugh that Sarah had once thought was reserved exclusively for their private moments together. As other committee members arrived, Victoria and David quickly adjusted their positioning, but the transition felt practiced, as though they'd become skilled at managing public perception of their interactions. Sarah took her seat across the room, participating in the broader discussion while maintaining careful watch over the subtle communication continuing between her husband and her employer. The meeting's conclusion brought another unsettling moment. As volunteers began gathering their materials to leave, Victoria approached David with a request that seemed both professional and personal. The downtown lights would need to be tested before the festival, and she wondered if he might have time to assist with the inspection. The task would require evening work, naturally, given the need to see the illumination effects properly. David agreed immediately, his enthusiasm for the assignment striking Sarah as disproportionate to its actual importance. As they discussed timing and logistics, Sarah noticed how Victoria's fingers briefly touched David's wrist when she handed him the building keys, and how David's eyes followed Victoria's movements as she walked toward the exit. The following evening, Sarah found herself driving slowly through downtown Salem's historic district. She told herself she was simply admiring the early holiday decorations, but her route took her past the Hartwell Textiles building, where she could see lights on in Victoria's office and David's car in the parking lot. The sight confirmed the evening work he'd described, but it also filled her with a sense of exclusion that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. When David returned home after 10 o'clock, he was energized in a way that seemed inconsistent with mundane maintenance work. His description of the evening emphasized technical challenges and Victoria's impressive problem-solving abilities. But Sarah detected undertones that suggested their collaboration had involved more than simply checking electrical connections. The weekend brought Salem's first significant snowfall, transforming the downtown area into a picturesque scene that attracted visitors from throughout the Willamette Valley. The Thanksgiving festival planning entered its final phase, requiring extensive coordination between vendors, volunteers, and city officials. Sarah's responsibilities included managing communication between different committee chairs, a role that provided insight into various participants' schedules and activities. It was through this work that she discovered David and Victoria had scheduled a site visit to inspect vendor setup areas, a task that would take them to various locations throughout the county. The inspection was scheduled for Sunday afternoon, a time when most committee work was suspended and the locations would be largely empty of other people. Sarah spent that Sunday afternoon at home, ostensibly catching up on household tasks, while actually monitoring the clock and imagining what kind of vendor inspections might require several hours of private time away from Salem's watchful community eyes. When David returned, his explanation of the day's activities was detailed and professional, But Sarah noticed grass stains on his jacket and a small tear in Victoria's business card that he'd placed on the kitchen counter. The Thanksgiving festival itself proved to be both a community triumph and a personal revelation. Sarah worked the information booth, greeting visitors and providing directions to various attractions. From this vantage point, she had a clear view of the main staging area where Victoria served as the primary coordinator for Hartwell Textiles' impressive display. Throughout the day, David appeared at Victoria's side with remarkable frequency, assisting with tasks that seemed to require extensive consultation and coordination. Their collaboration was efficient and effective, earning praise from festival organizers and community members. But Sarah also observed moments of connection that transcended professional necessity. Shared smiles, brief touches, and private conversations that created an invisible bubble of intimacy around them. The festival's success was undeniable, and the Hartwell Textiles display received special recognition from the Chamber of Commerce. As the community celebrated another successful event, Sarah applauded along with everyone else while grappling with the growing certainty that her marriage was becoming collateral damage in a relationship that had evolved far beyond appropriate workplace boundaries. December's arrival brought with it a series of revelations that would forever alter Sarah's understanding of her life in Salem. The Christmas season traditionally meant increased business for Hartwell Textiles, as regional retailers stocked up on holiday fabric collections and special order materials. The heightened activity provided perfect cover for what Sarah was beginning to recognize as a carefully orchestrated deception. The first significant discovery came through a mundane administrative task. While organizing Victoria's calendar for the upcoming week, Sarah noticed several appointments marked simply as RT meetings, scheduled during lunch hours and late afternoons. When she asked Victoria for clarification to ensure proper preparation, Victoria's explanation was vague, mentioning review sessions for year-end reports that would require David's input as warehouse supervisor. That evening, Sarah decided to conduct her own review session. After David fell asleep, she carefully examined his wallet, finding a restaurant receipt from Bentley's Grill, Salem's most expensive dining establishment. The date matched one of Victoria's mysterious RT meetings, and the amount suggested a meal for 2 people, with wine. When she questioned David about it the next morning, he claimed it was a working lunch with a potential supplier, but his explanation felt rehearsed. The second discovery was more disturbing. While dropping off dry cleaning at Miller's on Commercial Street, Sarah encountered Janet Morrison, who mentioned seeing David and Victoria together at Powell's Books in Portland the previous Saturday. According to Janet, they'd appeared to be shopping together, examining travel guides and sharing coffee at the in-store cafe. Sarah knew David had told her he was attending a warehouse equipment seminar that Saturday, while she'd spent the day visiting her sister in Corvallis. The realization that they'd used her absence to travel to Portland together felt like a betrayal that went beyond simple deception. Portland was an hour away, far enough to provide anonymity, while close enough for a convenient day trip. The third revelation came through Sarah's own detective work. Using the skills she'd developed in managing Victoria's complex business correspondence, she began paying closer attention to patterns in the office's phone and email activity. She noticed that David frequently received calls on his personal cell phone during work hours, conversations that required him to step outside or move to quiet corners of the building. One afternoon, when David left his phone on his desk while helping with a delivery, Sarah saw a text message notification that made her blood run cold. The message was from Victoria. "Looking forward to tonight." The usual place. The timestamp showed it had been sent just minutes earlier, while Victoria was supposedly in a client meeting across town. Sarah's hands trembled as she set the phone back in its exact position, but the damage was done. The usual place implied a routine, a pattern of secret meetings that had been happening while Sarah remained oblivious. The casual tone suggested a level of intimacy that made her feel sick to her stomach. The fourth discovery pushed Sarah past the point of denial. During the annual Christmas party at the Grand Hotel, she watched David and Victoria navigate the social evening with practiced skill. They never appeared together for extended periods, always maintaining appropriate distances, and their conversations seemed perfectly professional when others were nearby. But Sarah noticed things others missed. The way Victoria's eyes sought out David across the room, the subtle signals they used to coordinate their movements, and the moment when they both disappeared from the main ballroom for nearly 20 minutes. When they returned separately, Victoria's lipstick had been reapplied, and David had a small stain on his shirt collar that hadn't been there earlier. The final confirmation came through pure accident. While organizing files in Victoria's office the following Monday, Sarah discovered a hotel keycard that had slipped between the pages of a client folder. The card was from the Riverside Inn, a small, discreet establishment 30 miles outside Salem that catered to couples seeking privacy. The date stamped on the magnetic strip corresponded to a weekend when David had claimed to be attending a trade show in Eugene. Standing alone in Victoria's office, holding physical evidence of the affair that had been systematically destroying her marriage, Sarah felt the last of her hopes crumble. The woman she'd worked for and respected had been methodically seducing her husband, while David had been lying to her with increasingly elaborate stories. The betrayal was complete, professional and personal, conducted under the nose of Salem's tight-knit community that prided itself on trust and moral values. As Christmas approached, Sarah realized she was facing the most difficult decision of her life. She could continue pretending ignorance, hoping the affair would burn itself out, or she could confront the truth and accept the consequences. Either choice would forever change her place in Salem's community, but only one would allow her to reclaim her dignity and self-respect. The decision crystallized during Salem's traditional Christmas Eve service at First Presbyterian Church. Sitting in the pew she'd shared with David for 3 years, Sarah watched him fidget with his phone, probably reading messages from Victoria, who sat across the sanctuary with her husband Robert. The sacred setting made the deception feel even more profane, and Sarah knew she could no longer be complicit in her own betrayal. January's harsh winter weather provided the perfect backdrop for Sarah's transformation from victim to investigator. The Christmas holidays had passed in a tense simulation of normalcy, with David's distraction becoming so obvious that even Salem's notoriously discreet neighbors began making subtle inquiries about their marriage's health. Sarah's first strategic move was to document everything. Using her administrative skills, she created a detailed timeline of David's absences, Victoria's schedule changes, and the various inconsistencies she'd observed over the past months. The pattern that emerged was both methodical and damning, revealing an affair that had been carefully planned and executed with the precision Victoria brought to all her business ventures. The evidence included restaurant receipts, hotel keycards, credit card statements, and even photographs Sarah had discreetly taken during public events. Each piece of documentation represented another nail in the coffin of her marriage, but also another step toward reclaiming control over her life. Her second move was more daring. Sarah began following David and Victoria, using her intimate knowledge of their schedules and Salem's geography to track their secret meetings. The Riverside Inn became a regular destination, along with restaurants in neighboring towns, and even a cabin rental near Silver Falls State Park that Victoria maintained for business retreats. The photographic evidence Sarah gathered during these surveillance missions was devastating. Images of David and Victoria entering hotel rooms, sharing intimate meals, and walking hand in hand through locations where they thought they wouldn't be recognized. Each photograph was time-stamped and catalogued, creating an undeniable record of their relationship's progression. The third phase of Sarah's investigation involved researching Victoria's background more thoroughly. What she discovered added another layer of complexity to the situation. Victoria Hartwell had a history of relationships with married men including a previous affair that had ended her first marriage and forced her to relocate to Salem. The pattern suggested that Sarah's husband was not Victoria's first target, nor would he likely be her last. Most importantly, Sarah learned that Robert Hartwell, Victoria's current husband, had a reputation for explosive jealousy and vindictive behavior when crossed. Local gossip, carefully gathered through Salem's network of longtime residents, painted a picture of a man who took personal betrayal very seriously and had the financial resources to make life extremely difficult for those who deceived him. Sarah's fourth discovery was perhaps the most valuable. Robert Hartwell was completely unaware of his wife's affair. His trust in Victoria was absolute, based on her public reputation and her apparent dedication to their shared business interests. He often bragged to other community members about Victoria's work ethic and loyalty, unknowingly providing Sarah with insight into his blind spots. The realization that Robert was as much a victim as she was gave Sarah an idea that would prove pivotal to her ultimate revenge. Rather than confronting David and Victoria directly, she could provide Robert with the same evidence she'd gathered, allowing him to make his own decisions about how to handle his wife's betrayal. Sarah spent several weeks planning her approach. She knew Robert's schedule, his business habits, and his personal triggers. She also understood Salem's social dynamics well enough to predict how the revelation would spread through the community and affect everyone involved. The decision to act came during a particularly brazen display of Victoria and David's relationship. During a supposed business dinner with out-of-town clients, Sarah followed them to a romantic restaurant in McMinnville, where they behaved like lovers rather than colleagues. Victoria wore a dress that Sarah recognized as one David had specifically complimented, and their physical intimacy throughout the evening left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. That night, Sarah finalized her plan. She would present Robert with comprehensive evidence of the affair, allowing him to take whatever action he deemed appropriate. The approach would protect her from accusations of vindictiveness, while ensuring that both Victoria and David faced consequences for their deception. Sarah's execution of her revenge plan was as methodical as her investigation had been. She scheduled a meeting with Robert under the pretext of discussing administrative matters related to the company's expansion plans. The meeting took place at Robert's private office downtown, away from Hartwell Textiles where Victoria might interrupt. The revelation unfolded slowly, with Sarah presenting evidence in carefully ordered sequences that told the story of the affair's development. Robert's initial disbelief gave way to anger, then to a cold fury that was more frightening than any explosive outburst would have been. By the end of their meeting, Robert Hartwell had seen enough evidence to understand the full scope of his wife's betrayal. His response was swift and devastating, setting in motion a series of events that would transform all their lives in ways none of them could have anticipated. February brought Salem its worst ice storm in decades, but the natural disaster paled in comparison to the human tempest that erupted when Robert Hartwell confronted his wife with Sarah's evidence. The confrontation took place on a Thursday evening at the Hartwell Mansion on State Street, but its effects rippled through Salem's business community with the speed of social media and the persistence of small-town gossip. Robert's reaction exceeded even Sarah's expectations. Rather than simply demanding explanations or threatening divorce, he approached the situation with the same strategic thinking that had made him successful in business. His first move was to secure legal documentation of the affair, hiring a private investigator to obtain additional evidence that would be admissible in divorce proceedings. His second move was more immediately devastating. On Friday morning, both David and Victoria arrived at Hartwell Textiles to find their employment terminated, their access to company accounts revoked, and their personal belongings packed in boxes waiting by the entrance. Robert had worked through the night with his legal team to ensure the terminations were unassailable, citing breach of professional conduct and violation of the company's ethics policies. Victoria's dismissal was particularly brutal, because it stripped her of both her position and her reputation simultaneously. Word of the affair spread through Salem's business community with remarkable speed, transforming her from a respected entrepreneur into a cautionary tale about professional boundaries and personal morality. David's termination carried additional consequences. Robert ensured that news of the affair reached other potential employers in the region, effectively blacklisting David from similar positions throughout the Willamette Valley. The personal recommendation letters that had once opened doors for David were now replaced by whispered warnings about his character and reliability. Sarah watched these developments from her position at Hartwell Textiles, where Robert had not only retained her services, but promoted her to office manager with a significant salary increase. Her efficiency and discretion during the crisis had impressed him, and he recognized her value as someone who understood both the business operations and the importance of loyalty. The promotion represented more than just professional advancement. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah had financial independence and decision-making authority. The salary increase allowed her to move into a larger apartment downtown, symbolically distancing herself from the suburban home she'd shared with David. The social consequences for Victoria and David were swift and merciless. Salem's community, which had once welcomed them as a successful couple and reliable employee respectively, now viewed them with suspicion and disapproval. Invitations to social events disappeared, professional networking opportunities evaporated, and even casual encounters at local businesses became uncomfortable reminders of their fall from grace. Victoria's situation was particularly desperate. Her termination from Hartwell Textiles meant losing not only her salary, but also her primary source of professional identity. Robert's divorce proceedings were designed to leave her with minimal financial resources, and her damaged reputation made finding comparable employment virtually impossible. David's circumstances were equally bleak. Without Robert's recommendation, he struggled to find even basic warehouse work in the region. The affair had not only cost him his marriage and job, but had also branded him as untrustworthy in a community where personal recommendations carried significant weight. As winter gave way to spring, Sarah observed the continuing deteriorations of her former husband and her former boss with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. The revenge she'd orchestrated had achieved its intended goals, but the complete destruction of their lives sometimes felt more comprehensive than she'd originally intended. The most unexpected development was Robert's growing appreciation for Sarah's contribution to his business and his personal recovery from the betrayal. Their working relationship evolved into a friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience of Victoria's deception. Robert's trust in Sarah's judgment grew steadily, leading to increased responsibilities and influence within the company. Sarah also discovered talents she'd never known she possessed. Managing the office's daily operations revealed organizational and leadership abilities that had been suppressed during her years as a subordinate. Her efficiency improvements and cost-saving measures impressed Robert and contributed to the company's continued growth, despite the disruption caused by Victoria's departure. The seasonal transition from winter to spring seemed to mirror Sarah's personal transformation. As Salem's gardens began blooming and the community prepared for its annual May Day celebration, Sarah found herself looking forward to the future for the first time in months. The pain of David's betrayal was beginning to fade, replaced by confidence in her own capabilities and excitement about new possibilities. Spring's arrival in Salem brought with it opportunities for new beginnings that Sarah had never imagined possible. The May Day Festival, which she now helped coordinate as Hartwell Textiles' representative, provided a stage for demonstrating her evolution from betrayed wife to confident businesswoman. Her organizational skills and attention to detail earned praise from community leaders and established her as a respected figure in Salem's social hierarchy. The festival also provided Sarah's first encounter with Thomas Reed, a carpenter whose craftsmanship had attracted Robert's attention for a planned expansion of the Hartwell Textiles facility. Thomas was a widower in his early 40s, whose gentle manner and obvious integrity stood in stark contrast to the deception Sarah had experienced with David. Their initial conversations focused on business matters related to the construction project, but Sarah found herself drawn to Thomas's straightforward communication style and genuine interest in her perspectives on the building's design. Unlike her interactions with David, which had become laden with suspicion and hidden meanings, conversations with Thomas felt refreshingly honest and uncomplicated. Robert's observation of their developing friendship led to a conversation that surprised Sarah with its personal nature. During a lunch meeting to discuss company finances, he mentioned that Thomas had inquired about Sarah's availability for dinner, seeking Robert's perspective as both her employer and someone who understood her recent personal challenges. "He's a good man," Robert said simply. "Victoria's betrayal taught me the value of genuine people, and Thomas is as genuine as they come. He's also been alone since his wife passed 3 years ago, and I think he recognizes something special in you." The dinner invitation, when it came, felt like another step in Sarah's transformation. Thomas chose a quiet restaurant in nearby Silverton, far enough from Salem to provide privacy, while close enough to feel safe and familiar. Their conversation ranged from work to personal interests, revealing shared values about honesty, commitment, and the importance of community connections. Thomas's approach to relationships was everything David's had not been. He asked direct questions about Sarah's divorce and listened carefully to her answers, without trying to minimize her experience or rush her toward premature emotional commitments. His own experience with loss had taught him patience and the value of allowing relationships to develop naturally. As summer progressed, Sarah and Thomas's relationship deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility, rather than the passion and excitement that had characterized her marriage to David. Their shared involvement in community activities provided multiple opportunities for public interaction, allowing Salem's residents to observe and approve of their growing connection. The contrast between her new relationship and her marriage became increasingly apparent to Sarah. Where David had been secretive and deceptive, Thomas was transparent about his activities, his friendships, and his business dealings. Where David had made her feel insecure and suspicious, Thomas consistently demonstrated his trustworthiness through both words and actions. Robert's support for Sarah's relationship with Thomas extended beyond personal approval to practical assistance. He adjusted Sarah's work schedule to accommodate her social commitments and even provided business referrals that helped Thomas expand his carpentry operation. The gesture reflected Robert's appreciation for Sarah's loyalty during his own crisis and his desire to see her happiness restored. The summer also brought news of Victoria and David's continued struggles. Victoria had left Salem entirely, relocating to Portland where her reputation was less damaged, though she struggled to find employment commensurate with her previous position. David remained in the area, working temporary jobs and living in a small apartment that reflected his dramatically reduced circumstances. Sarah occasionally encountered David around town, interactions that were awkward but no longer painful. The man who had once been the center of her world now seemed diminished, his choices having led him to a life that was smaller and less meaningful than what they had once shared. Her anger toward him had faded, replaced by a mixture of pity and indifference that marked her emotional recovery. As autumn approached, bringing with it the anniversary of her first suspicions about David's affair, Sarah reflected on the magnitude of her transformation. The frightened, suspicious woman who had cataloged her husband's betrayals had evolved into a confident professional, a valued community member, and someone capable of building healthy relationships based on trust and mutual respect. Thomas's proposal came during Salem's Harvest Festival, in front of the same community that had witnessed Sarah's humiliation the previous year. His simple, sincere declaration of love and commitment was witnessed by friends and neighbors who had supported Sarah through her darkest period and now celebrated her triumph over adversity. The autumn wedding celebration felt like a community affirmation of Sarah's resilience and Thomas's character. Robert served as an unofficial father figure, walking Sarah down the aisle in a ceremony that symbolized not just her union with Thomas, but her complete transformation from victim to victor. The reception, held at the renovated Hartwell Textiles facility, showcased the business success she had helped achieve and the personal happiness she had rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. As winter returned to Salem, Sarah and Thomas settled into married life in a restored Victorian home on Court Street that Thomas had renovated with loving attention to period details. The house became a symbol of their shared commitment to preserving valuable things while adapting them for modern life, much like Sarah had preserved her core values while transforming her approach to relationships and personal independence. Winter's return to Salem found Sarah Mitchell Reed embracing her new identity with confidence and purpose. The Victorian home she shared with Thomas had become a gathering place for community events and business meetings, reflecting her evolved status as both a successful businesswoman and a respected community leader. Robert's trust in Sarah's capabilities had grown to the point where he named her general manager of Hartwell Textiles, with full authority over daily operations and strategic planning. The promotion represented not just professional advancement, but vindication of her worth as both an employee and a person. Under her management, the company's efficiency improved dramatically, profit margins increased, and employee satisfaction reached new heights. The transformation of Hartwell Textiles paralleled Sarah's personal evolution, where Victoria had ruled through intimidation and manipulation. Sarah led through collaboration and transparency. Her approach fostered loyalty among employees and suppliers, creating a business culture that reflected the community values Salem held dear. Thomas's carpentry business also flourished, aided by referrals from Robert and other business leaders who had come to respect Sarah's judgment. Their partnership extended beyond marriage to professional collaboration, with Thomas handling construction projects for Hartwell Textiles and Sarah managing the administrative aspects of his growing enterprise. The spring brought news that provided unexpected closure to Sarah's story of revenge and recovery. Victoria Hartwell had died in Portland, alone and largely forgotten by the community she had once dominated. Her death was attributed to health complications exacerbated by alcohol abuse and depression, a tragic end that emphasized the destructive consequences of her choices. David's situation was less dramatic but equally sobering. His inability to find stable employment had led to a downward spiral that culminated in his departure from Oregon entirely. Word reached Sarah through Salem's gossip network that he was working menial jobs in California, his dreams of professional success permanently destroyed by his association with Victoria and their mutual betrayal. The news of their fates affected Sarah differently than she had expected. Instead of satisfaction or vindication, she felt a profound sadness for the waste of potential and the unnecessary destruction that their choices had caused. Her journey from victim to victor had taught her that true success was measured not by others' failures, but by one's own growth and contribution to community welfare. Summer brought the ultimate validation of Sarah's transformation: pregnancy. At 38, she had begun to believe that motherhood was no longer possible, but her marriage to Thomas had restored not just her faith in relationships, but her hope for the future. The prospect of raising children in Salem's supportive community, with a partner who valued honesty and commitment, represented the completion of her journey from betrayal to blessing. The pregnancy announcement was celebrated throughout Salem's business community, reflecting the affection and respect Sarah had earned through her professional competence and personal integrity. Robert's reaction was particularly touching. as he viewed Sarah's happiness as partial compensation for his own loss of faith in marriage following Victoria's betrayal. As autumn arrived with its familiar display of seasonal beauty, Sarah reflected on the 3 years that had passed since her first suspicions about David's affair. The journey from discovery to revenge to recovery had transformed not just her circumstances, but her fundamental understanding of her own capabilities and worth. The annual Harvest Festival provided an opportunity to measure her progress against the community's expectations and her own goals. As she addressed the gathering in her role as Hartwell Textiles' general manager, Sarah saw reflected in the audience's faces the respect and affection she had earned through consistent demonstration of the values Salem held most dear. Thomas's presence at her side, Robert's supportive applause, and the visible evidence of her professional success combined to create a moment of triumph that was all the sweeter for having been earned rather than inherited. The woman who had once feared confronting her husband's betrayal had become someone capable of leading others and inspiring their confidence. The winter brought the birth of Sarah and Thomas's first child, a daughter they named Hope, in recognition of the optimism that had sustained Sarah through her darkest period. The baby's arrival was celebrated by Salem's community as evidence that good ultimately triumphs over evil, that loyalty is rewarded, and that new beginnings are always possible for those with courage to pursue them. As Hope's first Christmas approached, Sarah found herself grateful for the pain that had initially seemed unbearable. Victoria's betrayal and David's deception had been the catalyst for discovering strengths she never knew she possessed and opportunities she might never have pursued. The affair that had nearly destroyed her had instead liberated her from a life that was too small for her true potential. Standing in her beautifully restored home, surrounded by her husband, daughter, and the community that had supported her transformation, Sarah understood that her story was ultimately one of redemption rather than revenge. The justice she had sought had been delivered not through her actions, but through the natural consequences of choices made by people who valued temporary pleasure over lasting integrity. Salem's winter landscape, covered in snow that transformed familiar streets into scenes of pristine beauty, seemed to mirror Sarah's own transformation. What had once appeared to be an ending had become a beginning. What had seemed like destruction had become reconstruction, and what had felt like defeat had become the foundation for victory. The story that had begun with betrayal and suspicion had evolved into one of community, family, and professional success. Sarah Mitchell Reid had not simply survived Victoria Hartwell's attempt to destroy her marriage. She had used that destruction as the foundation for building a life that was richer, more meaningful, and more authentic than anything she had previously imagined possible. Thank you so much for following Sarah's incredible journey of transformation and triumph. We hope this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption has moved you. If you enjoyed watching Sarah evolve from victim to victor, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more amazing stories. Every day we share new dramatic tales about life, love, and the power of resilience, so feel free to explore and find your next favorite story. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Sarah's revenge strategy? Do you believe justice was truly served? Share your opinions in the comments below. We'll see you tomorrow with another incredible story that will keep you on the edge of your seat.